can wait till everyone's set up. Oh, good, we're recording. I get to see a little circle with a red light in it. So I'll refresh again. Dorothy Beerson, Stephen Ottinger, both here from Brooks Powers Group. So just to refresh from last time, we talked about engagement and we went ahead and defined it in terms for this training to help everyone understand what we're approaching. And we defined engagement as a student's participating in their education to the extent of their capacity at that moment. Again, key words here are participation and what that looks like, to the extent of their capacity, meaning what might be some barriers and how are we helping them with that, and at that moment, because education right now can look very different depending on the moment that you're engaging in it. And then we also reviewed concepts that were impacted by, or that can impact engagement, and that was looking at school refusal, and I spoke on that quite a bit. And then Steve spoke a little bit on stress and adverse experiences. Steve, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, that is great. I think just as that refresher, just in thinking about how these two concepts are ones that are going to be impacting engagement, and really thinking about what we can do to support addressing stress and adversity to become a support in engagement rather than a barrier to.
Wonderful. All right, so Steve's going to jump right in.
Yep. So you'll see on this slide, one of the things that Dorothy and I often talk about, we both have backgrounds in school psychology. So to us, really having a clear plan and some ideas of how we're going to kind of track how things are going are just such key pieces to really making intentional change. I always go back to the idea of New Year's resolutions. One of the reasons that they so often fall through is not the intention, it's not the desire for change, but it's about having a clear plan and being able to know how you're putting that into manageable steps for yourself, and knowing how you're keeping track of the progress and how it's going, so you can check in and know, okay, what do I want to change here to make this a little bit more manageable, right? And so with that in mind, we put together a basic form. And so we very much encourage you to use this if this is something that's helpful to you. But just breaking down that process to make it into those chunks that are a little bit more manageable for creating a plan. So identifying, what is the problem, what is the thing that we're working on, and really specifically getting specific in this. When and where is it happening? What might be behavior that we're kind of identifying? What might that be communicating? And using that to kind of help define what we want to do about it. And so that then moves into what's a viable solution. And there can be a lot of viable solutions, but the idea here is what's the one thing we want to try, and really getting specific into what am I going to be doing, or what are we as a system going to try and do, versus trying to put the solution specifically into others' behavior. Because just in kind of noting that piece, the only behavior that we can change is our own and the environment that we work in. So being really intentional about making sure we're thinking about that in our solutions. And then I put together a few different questions that can just really help guide putting the plan into motion. And so really kind of thinking about, what resources do I need? What support might I need? How can I use visuals or other resources to make this more accessible, both for myself, because I can tell you in my New Year's resolutions, if I do not have visuals that are reminding me and cueing me, it isn't going to happen. And so recognizing what's going to help me be really effective in putting the solution into practice, and then what might be helpful for making it accessible to others in my family, to others if they come by and are supporting, and to our kiddos, who are the ones that we're doing this for the benefit of. And then continuing to think of, what are the key steps? What are those key ingredients that are going to make this plan into action? And how will I know if it's going well? How will I know if there might need to be a change? And so I very much encourage you to use this framework, and we'll share this document as well as a form that you will have access to as we get things up and onto an external website. But just having this in mind, I encourage you to kind of keep this framework in mind as we go through today.
And the other piece just to add there is that we've given the teachers a similar frame, right? So this is again why Steve and I were so excited about the collaboration with this series of doing 3 for teachers and 3 for parents. There's a teacher version, and we wanted you guys to have your own too. So you're walking into those meetings or conversations with your school team and understanding the framework. So Steve spoke to a document that can be used to create the plan or to keep it outlined for you when we're talking about supporting our students with their engagement. I wanted to take just a second to talk about the how, like how do you communicate that? Oh, sorry, guys. There we go. And there were just two areas that I thought would help us to look a little closer. And one was, can you see it? And the second is the mile markers that you're using to determine success and progress. So with that in mind, I want to talk a little bit about mission control, or what I call mission control, which is where you take all those wonderful things that Steve just talked through and make sure that everyone in your family who needs to know knows in a visual form. And I found this great picture. But another way of looking at it is just, where in the house are you putting up those expectations and those goals that you're shooting for? What is the goal, right? Where does it need to be completed? So for example, for your students, it might be attending a virtual class, right? So what class? Where are they going to be doing that? In what room of the house? And when? Some of the basic facts that are really important for students as far as following through with that plan, and it keeps everyone on the same page. So again, think mission control, all the information that they need in one location in the house where they know to go and look for it. This also allows you, if there's any changes to the plan, which, I mean, we all know public education, it's all changing kind of on a weekly basis here. We have one place to go and look at for those changes. When I talk mile markers, here's where I'm talking about making sure that you're taking the time to review the path that you've taken, right? So like Steve said in the slide before, looking back at the data and the progress that you've made so you can determine where you are now. And then along those same lines, checking in along the way. So oftentimes when we set up plans or expectations for our students, like, hey, our goal is for you to attend English virtually all week, right? You got to check in and see how that's going, and know when to check in and know how to, because if your student says, oh, how much longer do I have to keep attending English, right? Or I'm doing really good, what's next? You can say, well, remember, every Friday we check in on the plan, right? Or every couple of weeks we meet with your teacher and we talk through what's next, so that you have a way to reflect on where you've been. And then the last thing that's really important when we think mile markers or just communicating plans is celebrating when you reach your destination and celebrating those successes with engagement. Remember how we talked with you guys last week? Any small success is a big deal, right? So if you have a plan and you've reached a part of it, celebrating that makes it all the more special for everyone and really reinforces for the student being able to go through that same pattern again and experience success as well. So really with these two slides, Steve and I are just getting at having a plan and working with your school team around that, and then having a way to communicate that plan to everyone involved. Go ahead, Steve.
So one of the things that we want to start with is just to look back at what helps. So what are these things that we've talked about before, digging a little bit further into some examples, what that might look like, how do we do it, why we're doing it. So touching base back on those things, which we've done a little bit about already, but digging a little more into that, and just making sure that we're able to provide you with a few examples of the strategies in application.
So on that note, last time I showed you guys this idea of gradual introduction of stressors, right? Or helping build steps towards your overall goal of engagement for your kiddos. So I put two examples of this. One's virtual, and then the next slide we'll be looking at returning to in-person, and wanted to give you a general idea of how you and your school teams can talk through this process. So when we look here, you can see if I've outlined it in 10 different steps, and that can align too with your students' stress or anxiety level around each step. So at step 10, that might be the thing that's like the most stressful for the student and the family. Step 1 is what seems like the most manageable first step. And with your school teams, you can talk through how to gradually build this up. So here you can see how in the virtual setting, we might start with just sitting down at the desk with a hard copy of work that can be done for 5 minutes, right? So you're in the space where the virtual learning would start, and you have the student gradually building up from there, but engaging in that for a certain amount of time. Next, we might have them sit at the desk, log on with the camera and volume off for 5 minutes until the teacher gives them a thumbs up, and then they go back to the hard copy work. Right? And again, from there, as you can look, it just builds in terms of time and in terms of amount of work expectation. And each of these can have their own individual plan with the school team so that everyone's on the same page in terms of how to support the student with engaging around that. And I have a blank copy of this that I provided to all your school teams, and I'm happy to provide it to you too. The big thing here for families to think through is, what is my goal, right? What do I want my student to be doing? What does that engagement look like, right? Remembering the definition that we had as far as their ability or capacity to engage in their education at that moment. And then what's the first step that we can take, and how can I break that down? And a big note here, remember, this can take time, and scheduling the plan needs to be clear for the whole team, student included if age and developmentally appropriate. When we look at the same idea for returning to school in person, I wanted to give you guys a breakdown of how that might look like, because I know a lot of us are in that process or might have already started to some degree. You can do the same thing, but just breaking it down into more steps in regards to the transition to school. So this might start with a wake up routine and then a drive by school, returning to home and doing online there, right? Or if online is not an option because they're signed up for in person, doing hard copy work, right? So they're starting just by engaging in a drive by. Next, this might look like driving to school, checking in with the teacher for a couple minutes, and then heading home and doing online learning from there. And again, I don't want this to feel like, oh my goodness, all this driving, right, on the parent end. This can totally be set up based on parent need and availability, based on transportation and all of that, because this is just a general setup, right? So we talk about all the barriers that might be present as we define these steps as well. Then from there, we might move to staying into school for one full activity or class, depending on what their options are. And again, building up participation and building up academic engagement as they go. And you'll see that each step takes time, but as we go through these, you'll have much more patterns of success for the student, and you'll be able to identify barriers that cause increased anxiety, or also just pieces to the plan that aren't quite working that you need to tweak. So occasionally I'll throw out, you have this 10-step plan, but you have to add step 6.5 and step 7.25 and 7.5 and 7.75 because you realize that there's additional steps that need to be taken in there. Really, these two are just to help you guys as parents know that the process is gradual, and we need to work together as a team to identify what are some steps that we can take towards that bigger goal of engagement. So I spoke about steps, and I spoke about making sure the whole team's on the same page. So I wanted to take a second and just talk with you guys all as parents and guardians about some really helpful communication strategies when talking with your school teams. And remember, the school teams are getting the same kind of language in terms of how to support and communicate effectively with all members of the team, including parents and guardians. So let's take a little bit closer look at some of these tips and tricks. The first one being having a tool for setting up routine communication focused on positive messaging. And we said the same thing, right, to school teams. So making sure that we're communicating not just on the negative, but also on the positive, and that you guys feel like you're preemptively sharing with teams around important information that's been identified. So the document that Steve shared, the goal, it's awesome to communicate around what a goal might be, right? What positive progress have you made towards that goal? And then what might be some positive steps you want to take the next week in, again, supporting that goal. This can keep everyone on the same page, especially when the kid's home often, like in virtual learning, and the teachers aren't seeing everything. You guys are their eyes and ears a lot of the times. The next thing is remembering to proactively establish a system for supportively reporting when there are struggles. So like I said about having a routine way to communicate positives, this can lend itself really well when there are struggles. You know exactly how to communicate around that, right? Like, okay, we had a problem this week. Our goal is this. We took 2 steps backwards, right? Or we identified 2 additional barriers to engagement this week. Or there was a setting event or something that happened at home that might be impacting it. For example, I had a client who the family cat passed away. It's really traumatizing for a lot of our kids. And so that could impact the steps for that week. So we want to make sure that we're able to communicate that to the school team so they can respond appropriately or adjust the plan if needed. The next tip I wanted to look at is what we can focus on when we are communicating, kind of that goal focused that I was outlining. And Stephen and I worked together to identify three main tips or steps that can help you through that process. The first would be when you're going to communicate with a school team, identify who, because a lot of times it can be there's lots of players on the team. And so having your point person or the person that you feel like you is responsive to that and making sure they're on board with that. This is often the case manager for our special education kids, can help make sure that the flow of information goes through the right pathways instead of just like this chaotic web that you guys sometimes experience. The next is making sure to review and reframe before you send. So I have a habit of whenever I'm sending information that's a summary, of putting together a draft, saving it, and then coming back to it just the next day, right? Because then I allow my emotions to take a step back and I'm able to make sure that I'm communicating around goal-oriented problem-solving strategies. And when I do it that way, I'm also able to analyze where I'm coming from with it. So we do highly recommend making sure that you give yourself that time to review and reframe, so that we're all working together towards that goal. And like I said, remembering to identify what your question is through that process, because then the school team can be ready with or help with a solution. And the final one is, what solutions are you thinking, right? The school team will have some to bring to you, but if you have some ideas, I mean, oh my gosh, you guys are the people who know your kids the best. So where can we start to try and change things? What are some of the barriers that you're seeing? And again, what is your goal to come from this? If you use these three steps, it really helps prime the school team to be able to support and respond to your needs in those moments. And again, brings the whole team together around you and the student, so that we can move forward with our engagement goals.
So just to do a quick review from last time, one of the big concepts we talked about was this idea of the 3 Rs in understanding how we're most effective in being able to learn. And this goes for everyone, but obviously for us, we're talking about our kiddos. And when we think about the 3 Rs, we think about how we are making sure regulation is supported, how we're connecting relationship, and how that's something that is being a support and foundation for how our kiddos are in a place to feel ready to learn. And then the last R is reason, right? That place where we are in a place to learn, and how can we do that in an effective way that can build a sense of competence and capability. And so in coming back to that, one of the really big pieces that I think is so key, particularly given the circumstances that we all find ourselves in, where there's stressors in so many different directions that we didn't have to deal with before. And there's new types of experiences that we're now having that are adding to that stress or adding to that uncertainty. And so one thing that's really important to remember is that emotions transfer. And so I believe I shared the bike analogy last time, but I want to go through it one more time because it's just such a good one. We know that when kiddos are learning how to use the bicycle, they often fall. And it's been really clearly observed that for kiddos who are learning how to bike, when they fall off the bike, there's two possible reactions. There is the, oh my gosh, you fell off the bike, you're gonna be injured, oh gosh, oh, are you okay, oh my gosh, like that really high reaction, which I can say as a parent is the one that happens inside. I feel it is so there. And when we have that reaction, mirror neurons go off in our kiddos' brains, and they then say, oh my gosh, this is a crisis that I fell off my bike. And so their emotions will mirror yours in that moment. The second potential reaction is, whoa, that was quite the spill. My gosh, are you okay? Let me come and help dust you off. Which, same content, right? Check, are you okay? Notice that, yeah, you fell, that probably hurt, and validate the experience. But the emotion, the calmness, the what you're then communicating through that reaction, that's going to transfer. And so your kiddo's a lot more likely to be able to get up, try it again. Whereas in the first instance, it's pretty likely your kiddo is going to have a hard time getting back on that bike, at least that day. And so I really just want to go back to that and really think about that again, because this is true in all experiences, in all settings we live in. And so I particularly like this quote from Dr. Bruce Perry. A regulated, calm adult can regulate a dysregulated, anxious child, but a dysregulated adult can never regulate, and I'm going to change this to um, anyone who is dysregulated. And so I just want to make sure that we're using that as our initial frame of how can I model that calm, relaxed, we got this, we can do this kind of state of being, because that is such a core piece of supporting through all of this uncertainty and the stress that comes with it that we're all kind of managing together right now. One last note is that even in all that, if your kiddo is dysregulated a lot, it's really important to notice how that's affecting you. Because in the same way that our kiddos will, if they're up here and we're down here, they'll move down to us. In the same way, if they're up here a lot and we're down here, we will slowly move up to them too. And so just being really self-aware too on that piece and doing what you need to do to help yourself feel regulated is a really great way that you can model regulation and coping strategies, and also make sure that you're in a good place to support your kiddos. So with that in mind, let's talk about a few strategies for that, like getting more specific. So I have two sets of strategies here that I want to just share and give us an opportunity to think through, and then also for you guys to ask questions about and for us to dig into a little bit. And one is more of a proactive strategy. So we know from research into positive psychology that there is so much value in prompting and in kind of proactively bringing into play positive emotions. Okay. And so in some settings, the idea behind that is using what we call emotional hooks, right? So if you remember those videos we prompted you with at the beginning, we picked them pretty purposefully, right? They're all ones that are, most of them are ones that are pretty funny, or at least I think so. Apologize if you don't. But ones that kind of give you some positive feelings, right? And that makes you puts you in a better place to kind of think and react positively to the experience you're going to have as well. And the really cool thing about this, what I absolutely love about this, is it doesn't have to be related at all to what you're actually going to do, right? So that opens up so many opportunities for what you can make of that kind of initial positive. And so when I think in terms of my family, what I often try and do is I try and find a way to intentionally start off the day with a positive. And there's a ton of ways to do that. That can be practicing gratitude. It can be really making sure you carve out a little bit of time for just some special time, some focused positive attention that is child directed. It could be celebrating a strength. What's the strength we're celebrating today and we're going to notice all day? Each of us pick one of our strengths, right? And so I'm really kind of giving an opportunity for everybody to think, what are my strengths? What do I, okay, right? And embedding that positive in that perspective. These are just a few options. There's a ton out there. Maybe it's watching, 30 seconds of your family's favorite video or TV series or whatever the case is, or a knock knock joke. I have one family I work with where it's knock knock jokes all day, every day. And that's just how they connect, and it's that positivity. But getting creative about what will help your family start off in a positive place. It won't mean that the whole day will be positive, but it means you're starting on the right foot. Okay, so that's the proactive strategy. And again, I do want to go back to the fact that there's a lot of research to support how effective this can be just for giving us that nudge towards the positive. Now, on the other side of it, in the moment, we know that there will be challenges, right? We all experience this. It's not expected that we can get through our day without frustrations happening or challenges coming up. And when those times lead to escalation, it's important to have a strategy for what we do in that moment to help us bring our brain back to a place of processing, right? Or at least push through the part where the highest escalation is and bring us back to here and now. And that's what grounding strategies are. So what grounding strategies are broadly is simple exercises that help our brain return to the here and now. And what's really important about these is that you want to have your brain come back to yourself and your body in this moment. So not thinking about what just happened, not thinking ahead to what's going to happen, but right now. And so I've given a couple of examples here. It can be something that's active, an active kind of thing, like naming all the blue things that you see in the room right now, right? Or counting backwards from 100, all right? You can do that out loud or in your head. Get your other senses into it as well. For some kiddos, having other sensory input is what really helps them ground back, right? So just trying to see everything in the room, it's not enough of a distraction in that moment. They need something that's a little bit more interactive or sensory in other ways. So one good example is, write, I am okay in your hand, okay, or on your thigh, right? So if you don't want it to be as obvious, you can write it on your thigh. But sometimes that sensory input can be something that is what helps you focus into the here and now. There are a ton of other examples. And so kind of thinking ahead to the resources that we have for you guys, I have a resource in here that has just a ton of different examples of how we can do this. And it's everything from very like in the moment kind of activities like this and active to using other kind of resources or tools for a brain break, right? So sometimes this can look like taking a break. But again, kind of coming back, the purpose of this is to help us push through and stay in our broader context, but just manage that moment where we're feeling the most escalated. Okay, so with that in mind, what we're talking about in both of these particular strategies is that feeling side. So we want to bring it back to the cognitive behavioral triangle, just because we know that this is the way that we can really push towards positive change and support effective change in all the different parts that cause us to experience things in either a positive way or a negative way, right? And build behavioral patterns. And so what we just talked about are two ways to be able to manage if you're having a negative feeling or to inspire more positive feelings, which are going to then translate into making choices in behavior that's going to be more effective. You're super escalated, you use that grounding strategy, and rather than getting up, flinging the paper off your desk and walking out, you stay put long enough for that escalation to decrease just enough that you can think and decide a different path. Or you had that gratitude moment at the beginning of the day, and later on, you have an experience with the teacher who you had thought really gratefully about that day and in that morning, and that experience isn't great. But because you did that gratitude exercise, you are a little more generous and say, well, okay, I wonder if they're just having a bad day today. Instead of saying, oh, they're so mean to me all the time, right? The meaning we might make could shift just a little bit just because we inspired that positive feeling. And that then again changes, what do we do in that moment? And so all of these different things, the idea here is that we just want to have opportunities to see how we can shift this triangle in any one place, because that will lead to shifts in the other parts.
And then I can add on to that too, when we think about strategies specific to each individual student around engagement and addressing those stressors that Stephen and I have talked through with all of this triangle helps us frame it on an individualized level as well, right? For that student, what are they feeling in that moment? What are they thinking in that moment? And what are the behaviors that we're seeing in that moment? And what are some strategies, tips, things we can do to help coach them to change any of those that aren't as effective or that are really impacting their ability to engage? And this also is a great slide for us to sort of end on as we transition to resources and such, and a place for conversation, because following spring break, when we come back, we're really going to be looking at that individualized level, right? We're going to be giving you individualized examples. We're going to be giving plenty of time for case study, right? For you as parents and guardians to bring your questions around your individual student at that place. And we want you to think triangle, right? Because this is how we understand what's going on for students and allows us to tailor it to their individual need. If we can fill this out for that student, then we can walk through strategies for that student. All right, so on that note, we wanted to wrap up with some resources and references, big takeaways, and then we'll give some time for questions. I have posted here, Anxiety Canada is by far one of my favorite resources for any kind of anxiety. They've got incredible videos that are tailored to different developmental levels and are actually really entertaining. Like, I got sucked into Anxiety Canada the other day. I also put on some resources from OSPI, which is our website that the school district is based out of, right? It's for our Office of Superintendent. And they've got some great information on absenteeism and truancy and resources just for parents to better understand all that process from the state level.
And as I mentioned before, the first link on the right is a worksheet that just goes through what grounding is a little bit more specifically than we talked about today, and gives a whole ton of examples of things you can do that go everything from just a thought exercise or an action to really engaging all of your senses. And so I very much encourage you to look through that and think about what's the grounding exercise that works for me, and go through with your kiddos and individualize that grounding, right? So, if you're going for a mantra of some sort, it gives an opportunity to develop what's your mantra. Um, the second and third articles on the right are just some articles that go through a little bit of that positive psychology piece. So, in kind of thinking about the 3 R's approach and thinking how important regulation and relationship are, positive psychology strategies are ones that we know are really supportive for both of those two aspects of our functioning. And so I very much encourage you to take a look at those just for some food for thought. And anything that pops up in those that is interesting, you are going to be able to find all kinds of information about it if you were to search further. So I encourage you to take a look at these. I found these two to be particularly helpful starting places.
All right, quick glance at some references. We don't want to take too much time there, but give them to you if needed. And then Steve will finish us up with the 3 big takeaways from today.
Yeah, so our big takeaways, what we were really hoping to make sure we were able to share today is that planning can and should be a really core component of supporting well-being and engagement. Not in the sense that it needs to become a barrier to, right? If I can't plan for this, I can't do it. But rather that it's a great tool to really help us make sure that if we do a little bit of that work up front and being proactive and really thinking through how we want this to look and what are the things we need to think of ahead of time, it's really going to be supportive in making sure we actually are able to do the thing that we want to do with it. And so that involves both what am I thinking about in all this and what do I see myself doing in all of this to kind of make this happen, which was the part of the form that I shared, as well as now how am I translating this to something my family as a whole can get on board with? And that was the part that Dorothy was talking through. We also wanted to make sure that we were able to share that using evidence-based strategies for communication and regulation, those are key for supporting engagement. They're the things that build that motivational base that really makes us feel ready to engage and then feel capable when we do. And so starting at that place, it's so important to use that as our building blocks. And then finally, just remembering that our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are connected. Think triangles all day.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. Remember to come to our last training after spring break on the 15th from 2 to 3. And then we're going to go ahead and drop in the link, our feedback form. We really do love any feedback you guys can give us. This being the last training in the series, if there's anything that we missed or pieces that you want to make sure we address in the next training, please don't hesitate to put that in the feedback form so that we can make sure we're meeting your needs when we get back from spring break. And then in addition, we put down here Steve and I's email address. We're happy to talk on the individual level. And next week, like I said, we'll go into that a little bit more. But if anybody wants to reach out with questions or to consult, we're always happy to help out.
And just to note, that is supposed to be 4:15, not 3:15. So for the date.
Oh, so, yes.
Just to make sure that part is clear. So
right, that date already passed. My apologies, guys. I can't believe we're on April. Ooh, hey, it's April Fool's Day, isn't it? April 1st today. Okay, yes. So that could be my April Fool's.
There you go.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, it's the week we get back from spring break, everybody. All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and I'll stop the presentation. And Lindsay, if you want to stop the recording, we can open it up to any questions.